as it is, chapter 13. And I'm continuing with the purport to text 8 through 12. Tulsi Vallabha Prabhu went up into cleanliness last week. So I titled this section, All These I Declare to Be Knowledge, statement by Krishna. And so we'll go over 6 topics of knowledge that Krishna speaks about in this section. And first we'll offer prayers to our spiritual masters and try to set a sankalpa of entering deeply into Bhagavad-gita. Om Agyana Tamarandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshuranmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam. Vandehang Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavangscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvetam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitangscha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Trubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhi Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Coming to you live from Butler, Pennsylvania. Going over Bhagavad-gita, chapter 13, texts 8 through 12. All these I declare to be knowledge. So chapter 13, we're diving into questions that Arjuna has for Krishna about knowledge, about kshetragya, knower of the body, field of activity. What is the field of activity? And Krishna previously talked about what makes up the field of activity. And in 8 through 12, he speaks about jnana, or knowledge. And the jnana that he's speaking about, or knowledge, is called svata siddha jnana, or self-manifest knowledge. And this is from Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, where he talks about how knowledge that is Veda. So in the previous verse, Sri Krishna, he brought up how he brought up knowledge from Vedanta Sutra, even saying even Krishna, God, is giving reference to Shastra, which all bona fide Shastra comes from the original source, Krishna. So Veda Amnaya is self-manifest knowledge, which is different from Indriya Paratantra Gyan. So Indriya Paratantra, knowledge people collect with their senses. And so the Acharyas explain how Krishna, in these verses, he's not just talking about knowledge that pertains to the material world. Actually, it's a ladder. And Srila Prabhupada talks about this in the last part of the purport to text 8 through 12, that this is a ladder leading up to the absolute truth. So this is not just knowledge that's found within the kshetra, the field of activity, but this is gyan, knowledge to get out of the field of activity, to free oneself. Now, Indriya Paratantra Gyan is always going to be filled with Brahma Pramada Vipralipsa Karuna Patava, or that which is, as one makes mistakes, is illusioned, cheating propensity, and then imperfect senses. So when we collect knowledge from the field of activity, right, so this chapter is talking about nature and field of activity, the knower, and ultimately knowledge. How we get knowledge from our senses is quite different from that knowledge that we get from Shastra and from Krishna. So Krishna is speaking directly on what is knowledge that will deliver us, whereas the others, it's filled with these different types of mistakes, illusions, cheating, and defective perception. These four things they're not found in the sayings of the authoritative sages or Vyasadeva. So we're getting knowledge from Krishna. Previously, the topics of knowledge that Tulsi Vallabha went through was humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master. And Srila Prabhupada talks about how humility is the doorway into the kingdom of God. And for today, the 6 items of knowledge that we'll be discussing: cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease, and detachment. And Tulsi Vallabha probably read this last week, but just to go over this is a very important point that Srila Prabhupada brings up in the beginning of the purport, that of all the descriptions of the process of knowledge, the most important point is described in the first line of the 11th verse. The process of knowledge terminates in unalloyed devotional service to the Lord. So if one does not approach or is not able to approach the transcendental service of the Lord, then the other 19 items are of no particular value. Sorry, that just rang like that. I forgot to close the mail. All right, back to play. Sorry about that. So Srila Prabhupada continues, but if one takes to devotional service and full Krishna consciousness, the other 19 items automatically develop within him. So this point is brought up in the 5th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 18, text 12, where it's stated, all the demigods and their exalted qualities, such as religion, knowledge, and renunciation, become manifest in the body of one who has developed unalloyed devotion for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva. On the other hand, a person devoid of devotional service and engaged in material activities has no good qualities. Even if he is adept at the practice of mystic yoga or the honest endeavor of maintaining his family and relatives, he must be driven by his own mental speculations and must engage in the service of the Lord's external energy. How can there be any good qualities in such a man? So Srila Prabhupada is bringing up this verse to point out that Krishna consciousness, when we look at all of these qualities, and of or topics of knowledge. And also when we look at Srimad Bhagavatam 1-7, Vasudeva Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha Janayat Yashu Vairagyam Yadam Chad Yadam Haitukam, that by worshiping Krishna, one becomes full of all good qualities. So these qualities that are being spoken of are these topics of knowledge. So if you just have full Krishna consciousness, unalloyed devotional service, then the 19 items automatically develop within him. In the verse Srimad Bhagavatam in the 5th canto, someone might hear that and think, so if you're not Krishna conscious, then you have no good qualities, because it's all built on mental speculation and so on. But even some of these qualities that are spoken of in this verse, 8-12, the last two actually are for those who are jnanis, not necessarily those who are bhaktas. So there can be many different qualities that one has: pridelessness, humility, cleanliness. We see how some people are very clean. And so we should understand that this verse is glorifying devotional service, that those qualities will automatically manifest. And Srila Prabhupada would point out on how so many people might have good qualities, but they're like zeros. And if you put Krishna in the front, right, if you have so many zeros, it seems like there's nothing there. But if you have so many zeros and you put the one in the front, you then have a million. So it's a way of looking at how one can have so many good qualities, but if that quality of service to Krishna is lacking, then it's kind of like ornaments on a dead body. It's good qualities, but what are they being used for? You know, we look at Hiranyakashipu, Ravana, they even performed brahmacharya. They had to be humble. They had to have some of these qualities to become very powerful. And some people look at that, you know, they read self-help books and they hear about good qualities, cleanliness. I have to be punctual. I have to be up early in the morning, so on and so on, eat a good diet. And there's a type of austerity and good qualities in it. But what's the motivation to do that? And that's the point that Srimad Bhagavatam is pointing out, is that it's driven by the external energy rather than by the internal energy, Bhakti Devi. And then what happens is those can actually be used to become powerful and then do not so good things, even though they have good qualities. Sorry for the pixelated picture I was trying to find, not so pixelated, but this was kind of the best I could do last minute. We have Srila Prabhupada here, bathing with the devotees. And so the first topic of knowledge that we're going to dive into today is cleanliness. And Srila Prabhupada says that this is essential for spiritual life, for spiritual understanding. And so I wanted to have a picture of Srila Prabhupada bathing with the devotees. And he says cleanliness is in two sections, internal and external. And external, Srila Prabhupada says, means bathing. So we know that it's not just about bathing, but in bathing, we then brush our teeth, use different mineral soaps or different body washes to wash all the stuff off of us. And even bathing, for many devotees, it means 3 times a day, especially when you're engaged on the altar, trying to present yourself as clean externally, bodily, before the Lord, making sure that your body smells good, nice grooming, clean clothes. And they say cleanliness is next to godliness. This is a very popular saying. But why have external cleanliness? Right? Is spiritual life and is Krishna really worried about us being clean? But cleanliness connects us to the mode of goodness. So in the coming chapter, chapter 14, where we start diving into the modes of material nature, the mode of goodness will springboard us, has the ability to springboard us to transcendence. But if we're in the mode of passion and ignorance, where we're not keeping ourselves clean, then there can be so many things that keep us from reaching the mode of goodness. Mode of goodness means knowledge, brightness, cleanliness. Right? Even there's a story that Srila Prabhupada and the Acharyas talk about how there was a king. And the king, it was destined that he become contaminated by a ghost. But the king kept himself so clean clothes, clean body. He kept his external body so clean that the ghost didn't have anywhere to enter until one day he forgot to wash a part of his body and the ghost was able to enter. And so this story is used to show how when one is just externally clean, not even touching on the internals yet, but just externally clean, then one will not be contaminated by the lower modes. Ghosts and things like that are attracted to tamas, to the mode of ignorance. If anybody really wants to dive into what ghosts are attracted to and what they look like, we have the Vaishnav Purana called Garuda Purana, one of the older Puranas, and Puranas that's actually in the mode of goodness. And in Garuda Purana, it talks about the different bhutas and pretas and what they're attracted to and how to get free from them. Of course, internally, getting free from everything means chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So this is the internal cleanliness. So keeping oneself externally clean will help us in becoming internally clean. So starting with the chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, Srila Prabhupada points out that all of the different karmas and samskars are washed away. Cheto darpanam marjanam bhavamaha devagni nirvapanam. This is the first teaching of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu about the Mahamantra in the Shikshastakam, is that we have so many previous karma, good and bad, right? Good that can elevate us to higher levels of livelihood, taking us to the heavenly planets even in the next life, or it can degrade us through bad karma into lower species or even go to hellish situations. And samskars are those impressions that we have in the mind. So in conditional life, we're basically just deeply entangled in karma and these impressions within our mind that we're basically built up of these things. Pacheto darpanam marjanam, just like a mirror that has dust covering it, you wipe the mirror and you're able to actually see who you are, that you're not just these karma and samskars, impressions of the mind from previous lives. And even we have so many impressions in this life, right? We have so many commercial jingles in our mind. And so by chanting, though, we're wiping that mirror clean. We're able to see ourselves. But just like when we wipe, then we're actually able to really see how dirty the mirror is. And we actually do a thorough, what my wife calls detailed cleaning, right? I don't know if anybody else encounters this in family life, but there's cleaning and then there's detailed cleaning. And give an example, Srila Prabhupada, I believe this is in Jamuna Mataji's book, but one day some Matajis were told to clean Srila Prabhupada's room. They went in and cleaned what they thought very detailed and thoroughly. Blinds, everything was clean in the room. And Srila Prabhupada, when he walked in, he went over to his stapler. His stapler opened it up and saw dust inside. Now, Srila Prabhupada is teaching us how cleanliness is so important, but to be externally clean also means to be that much internally clean. And recently we just went through the Gundicha Marjana, where Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu teaches how everything should be cleaned a first time, cleaned a second time, splashing water, right? They were taking hundreds of water pots and throwing them up on the ceiling, down on the walls, on the floor. And he was even chiding those who weren't cleaning properly, right? Those who weren't cleaning properly, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami says he would not bear them any grudge. He would openly just say, you're not cleaning properly, because to get that karma samskars out, cleaning, and also to not dirty oneself again. So external cleanliness, internal cleanliness. So this is a topic of knowledge to get us to the point of the mode of goodness, and then springboard, and especially chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, internal cleanliness. And the next topic of knowledge is steadiness, which Srila Prabhupada says is determination. And he says, without determination, one cannot make tangible progress. And I just want to look up the word, get the dictionary definition of determination: the act of coming to a decision or fixing or settling a purpose, ascertainment as after observation or investigation. The quality of being resolute, firmness of purpose. So the steadiness, determination. And I wanted to go over how determination, right, to be determined and to have steadiness, there are certain things that can get in the way of being steady, what we call nishta, steadiness. Things that really block us from entering deeper into our chanting, our sadhana, our spiritual life. The first one is called utsaha mai, or beginner's enthusiasm. We've all had this experience that we find something new, and there's enthusiasm because it's new, right? And we want to learn all about it. But that enthusiasm might not be as steady as it was in the beginning, because then, just my own example in my life, how you come to Krishna consciousness, there's new dress, there's new foods, there's a new philosophy, new way of life. There's a different lingo, even language that devotees use with each other. And then you're wanting to really learn everything about this. And then you kind of come to a point where, okay, now it's kind of getting ordinary. In the beginning, it was really extraordinary. And then there's, okay, now it's kind of getting ordinary. That enthusiasm isn't there. So there's that beginner's enthusiasm, which can waver. But the real test then to steadiness is to keep up your enthusiasm, where it's not just a beginner's enthusiasm and then it wanes away. And luckily, by devotee association and Guru's mercy, we're able to keep that enthusiasm or even reinvigorate it, right? We have so many festivals and so many things throughout our sadhana that can really invigorate our enthusiasm, keep it alive. Next one is Ghana Tarala, thick and thin. And day to day, we have different moods. We have different things that happen to us, different type of sleep schedule or schedule at work. And so our determination in spiritual life, it can be thick and thin. Someday it can be really thick where it's like, okay, I'm diving deep, I'm reading Bhagavad-gita, I'm going to make it so that this day is just filled with Krishna consciousness, and the next day it's a little bit thinner. There's so many things that are happening that I can't be as absorbed, and so thick and thin, rather than thick or thin, just a steady go about. Vyuta vikalpa, indecision. So this is another thing that really can cram up our steadiness, which, right, a resolute purpose is that we are unable to make proper decisions in our life. And we see this sometimes with more younger persons in Krishna consciousness, where should I get married? Should I stay brahmachari? Should I move to this temple? Should I do this service? Should I do that? And rather than thinking about being steady in devotional service, you're constantly in indecision of what should be done and what should not be done. And so you're unable to be steady. Vishaya Sangara, war with the senses, literally day in and day out, sense objects are attracting us, and sometimes it's a war to not engage our senses with the material world that's going to drag us away from our spiritual life. Niyamakshama, unable to keep vows, or unable to follow the basic regulations of spiritual life. So this could be one makes a vow. We're in Chaturmasya now, where we take different vows. And sometimes we're unable to keep up those vows, or we make vows that could be on a whim, and then we're not able to keep up with those vows, rather than the steady vows that will make our devotional service stronger and stronger, like chanting 16 rounds, following the 4 regulative principles. And then finally, the other thing that can keep us from being steady or having proper determination is Taranga Rangini, what is called delighting in material facilities. But Taranga Rangini, you look at these Sanskrit words, they have beautiful imagery attached to them when you get into the details of the Sanskrit. So Taranga Rangini literally means to kind of wade around in the waters. And so delighting in material facilities where, okay, you're now externally a devotee, and people are recognizing that you're a devotee, you're dedicated to spiritual life, and so they can start offering you material facilities. Here's money for preaching, here's honor, here's respect, and you're delighting in those material facilities, which then you're more focused on the material facilities than on the internal spiritual life that we're supposed to be leading. And the 5 last items of unsteadiness, when you could even get through some of those things, there's laya vikshepa apratipati kushaya rasasvad, laziness in terms of, now this is when one is directly engaged in devotional service. So we can easily connect these 5 things to our japa practice. When we sit down and we're chanting japa, trying to absorb our mind in the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, thinking about cleaning the mirror of the mind and so on. There could be a time where we feel a little bit of laziness and we start dozing off and sleeping while we're supposed to be chanting. Vikshepa, distraction. When we're chanting japa, there might be a memory, right? We talk about samskars, the impressions of our mind. So we have impressions from our past where we were engaging in so many types of material activities. And sometimes when we're chanting japa and all of a sudden this thing pops up from our past that reminds us of our sensual lives and we're distracted. So laya and vikshepa, laya comes from the mode of ignorance, vikshepa from the mode of passion. A pratipatti, even without laya and vikshepa, even if you're not distracted, even if you're not lazy, you might be awake, but still you're just not able to like really absorb yourself. A pratipatti, this comes also from the mode of ignorance. Kashaya, you could be chanting japa when somebody does something and it provokes a certain anger to arise from you, or you see something and there's certain greed or pride taking away, and this goes back to the mode of passion. And then rasasvad, that there's an opportunity for sense pleasure. So we're chanting, we're sitting down, we're trying to absorb ourselves in our chanting, but there's an opportunity for us to do something material, engage our senses in something other than devotional service. And so that's rasasvad, an opportunity for sense pleasure. We put down the japa bag and go engage in that activity. So these are the different aspects of unsteadiness that which keeps us from getting to nishta, having that firm steadiness, firm resolute of purpose. And in Srimad Bhagavatam, this process is particularly pointed out in Canto 1, Chapter 2, starting with verse 16, Sushusho Shadadanasya Vasudeva Kataruchi, getting a taste for hearing and chanting about Krishna. Then one starts hearing about Krishna. Shanvatam Svakata Krishna Punya Shavanakit Hridayantasto Yavadrani, going back to that internal cleansing. Vidudoti Saritsatam, we're internally cleansing the heart. Krishna's cleansing the heart. We're engaged. But then there's Nashta Prayeshva Badreshu. So we're trying to daily establish ourselves in hearing Bhagavatam, engaging in service. And as soon as irrevocable loving service is established in the heart, the effects of nature's modes of passion and ignorance, such as lust, desire, and hankering, disappear from the heart. Then the devotee is established in goodness and he becomes completely happy. So this part of Tada Rajas Tamo Bhava, right? So a lot of these aspects of unsteadiness comes from passion and ignorance, but by performing devotional service day in and day out, trying to reach to that steady platform, then we'll actually get to that point where we're established in goodness. And then when we're established in the mode of unalloyed goodness, the man whose mind has been enlivened by contact with devotional service to the Lord gains positive scientific knowledge of the personality of Godhead in the stage of liberation from all material association. So this is all referenced in that part of Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 2, starting with text 16, and then also elaborately talked about in Madhurya Kadamini by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, to get to that platform of nishta, steadiness. So steadiness is an aspect or topic of knowledge, and then the next is self-control. And this goes along with what we just talked about in terms of Vishaya Sangraha and the other aspects of unsteadiness, Laya, Vikshepa, and Kashaya. So self-control, to really control the self, we have to take basically two principles in mind. Anukulyasya sankalpa, pratikulyasya sanshaya. That which is going to be inspiring for devotional service, we accept that. That which is going to hamper us, keep us from being steady, then we reject that. And this is how we actually use the mind in Krishna service, because the function of the mind is to accept and reject. Based on our samskars, or the impressions in the mind, we have certain things that we want to accept and certain things that we want to reject based on our physiological, psychophysiological nature, mind-body complex. So this is how we dovetail, or actually how we're able to have self-control, is we learn what's good for our spiritual life and what's bad for our spiritual life. That which is good for spiritual life, we accept. That which is bad for spiritual life, we reject. That's self-control. And self-control really starts with control of the tongue. And we have, by the mercy of Krishna, we have amazing prasadam to take. And it's kind of interesting being with family, and before eating with our family members, we still recite Shariya Vijaja Jadendriya Tahika Jive Pule. And sometimes we have Gauri say it and lead it. And then they ask, well, what does that mean? Well, the senses are a network of paths to death, and the tongue is the most voracious and uncontrollable. But by the mercy of Radha and Krishna, we have prasadam, food which is first offered to Krishna. And because this is first offered to Krishna, meaning it's cooked with love and devotion for Krishna, and then we take the remnants of that, the tongue becomes easily controllable. And in help, we call out to Gaura Nitai. We call out to Gauranga Nityananda to help us to try and control our senses by taking Krishna prasadam. But also we use all of the senses in Krishna's service. So starting with the tongue, we take prasadam, then we chant about Krishna, and then also speak about Krishna, and then we're able to use all of the senses in Krishna's service. And Srila Prabhupada goes in this in detail in the purport, talking about smelling the fragrance in the temple, smelling the flowers, seeing the deities. And in the very beginning, and Atta Shri Krishna Namadi, that we have material senses, but by service to Krishna, jivado, starting with the tongue, the jivado, seva mukya jivado, swayam eva spratyada. We're able to then perceive Krishna, who's transcendental, by transcending our senses, by using them in the senses, and by using the senses in Krishna's service. Krishna is Hrishikesh, the master of the senses, so we engage the senses in the master's service. And just as I was talking to Tushta Prabhu in the beginning of the class about how yesterday we got the great opportunity to go to the Sri Venkateshwar temple in Pittsburgh, which is just beautiful. Even on the outside, it has beautiful carvings like you would see in South India. Beautiful, beautiful complex. But then when you go in, I was even just appreciating Garuda, who has this like golden silk Brahmin thread and all these beautiful garlands, and he's wearing this dhoti. And then you see the deities, you see Lakshmi Devi and Vishnu, Balaji, or for some Krishna, Sri Venkateshwar in the middle, and Andal on the side, and how it's just such an amazing experience to just have all of your senses just flooded with Krishna. And I was meditating on how Andal, so when you go to Sri Venkateshwar temple, there's Balaji in the middle, Krishna. There's Lakshmi Devi in her own altar to the left. And then to the right of Sri Venkateshwar is Andal, who's one of the 12 Alvars. So just as we have our 6 Goswamis in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, in the Sri Sampradaya, there are the 12 Alvars. One of the Alvars is King Kulashekar, who writes the Mukunda Mala Stotram. So Andal, she has her own writings also, and I was going over some of her writings. She has a beautiful prayer that she writes called the Tirupavai, and in the Tirupavai, she actually glorifies the gopis' love of Krishna, and just beautifully, just beautiful prayers about Mother Yashoda and Krishna. It's really a special read. But Andal, she was a daughter of one of the priests in South India, and they would actually make the garland for Sri Venkateshwar and Tirupati. But one day they noticed that Andal, one of her hairs were in the garlands. And so they found out that what was happening is Andal, when they would make the garland for Sri Venkateshwar, she would actually put the garland on herself before it would be offered to Sri Venkateshwar, because she was imagining her, not just imagining, but she was experiencing herself as one of the beloveds of Krishna. She was having a full meditation to see if this is actually the proper length and proper garland for Krishna. But when they found one of her hairs, they were so disturbed. How are you wearing this garland? It's meant for the deity. And so there's this chastisement, but then that night, everybody had a dream. Venkateshwar came to them personally and said, I will not wear any garlands that are not first worn by Andal. Her name was Godai at that point. And so Andal, her name became Andal because just as Mother Yashoda bound Krishna with ropes, Andal bound Krishna with putting on these garlands. Just as Mother Yashoda is bound by the ropes for tying cows, Krishna is bound by the love of Andal, by garlands. And so even to this day, they have a deity, Sri Vigraha of Andal, and they still offer the garlands first to Andal, and then they put the garlands onto Sri Venkateshwar. And I thought, this is, they make amazing, beautiful garlands also. And just to take all of that in the senses and just think about that, wearing Krishna's garlands, we're actually able to, through the mercy of the deity, we're actually able to have such a exploration of the senses in Krishna consciousness. It's not just a sit down, don't taste anything, don't smell anything, neglect your senses. It's a full just explosion to the senses of all of these colors and senses, scents and fragrances, and what to speak of taste and so on. So just to reflect on self-control, sense control in Krishna consciousness. Then false ego, another topic of knowledge that Krishna brings up, false ego. So false ego, we have thinking oneself to be the material body. This is the false identity. Srila Prabhupada quotes, Aham Brahmasmi, I am spirit. I am the spiritual rather than the material. So we have a real ego. The false ego is to think that we're this material body, that we're matter. Now, we should understand we're in the material body now in terms of our experience in day-to-day life, but we are not the body. So going back to, this is a part of spiritual life that can be tricky. Some people say, well, we're not the material body, so I don't have to be clean. But Krishna explains first cleanliness, but then going to the false ego to see that the body is a temple for Krishna. Aham Brahmasmi. We're actually spirit. That's real ego. And this is over and over talked again about in Bhagavad-gita. And then finally, for today's class, getting to the last part of the topic of knowledge that will discuss the distress of birth, death, old age, and disease. So going with the false ego, the material body is born. Everything that is born in this world is going to ultimately end. So Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport that in Srimad Bhagavatam, there's so many aspects of birth that's talked about in Srimad Bhagavatam. In Kapila Dev's teachings, there's different stages, different months of what the embryo is experiencing within the mother's womb. So we're able, through Shastra, to understand how there is distress in birth. What to speak of being in a womb and not being able to move properly or even express ourselves. And in death, we have a Jamil. Right? So a Jamil, he has a chance, an opportunity to live properly. He's born in a Brahmin family, but he decides to let go of any restraints of a Brahminical life, and he ends up choosing to divorce his Brahmin wife. He's now infatuated with this person who's going to lead him to a path of degradation. And so when a Jamil is leaving his body, the Yamadutas come to take him away. And we hear about how death is not the end, but there's something to experience after death. And there can be distress after death, during death, while we're losing everything that's connected to this body and this body itself. So we hear in Shastra about birth and death and how there's much distress. And then in our own practical lives, Adi Daivika, Adi Bhotika, Adhyatmika. Adi Daivika, when we look at natural disasters, what's happening in Kentucky right now, it's a disaster where I was seeing some of the pictures of it, and there's just houses and houses that are flooded and flooded. There's already a death toll, and they say they're just going to find more and more bodies, and then it's supposed to rain even more and cause more flooding. And so we have earthquakes and hurricanes and so on. We see this around us, that there's a distress in the natural world due to these different phenomenons. Adibhotika, here being in a more humid climate than the mountains of Denver, Colorado, and Pennsylvania, there's bugs everywhere. Adibhotika. So, what to speak of interacting with other human beings and them not speaking to you in a polite way or cutting you off on the road, and on and on and on. So how so many human interactions, there's a certain type of distress there. Here, there's just bugs everywhere. And it can, you go outside and you're attacked by so many different living entities. And then adhyatmika, distress of this life where we're dealing with our mind, our body, right? And this goes to disease and old age. Adhyatmika, we're suffering with the mental, but then we're also suffering with the disease and old age. And Srila Prabhupada says, everyone gets practical experience of disease and old age. In COVID times, everyone is getting a practical experience of disease, what it means to be sick. Everybody will have a practical experience of what it means to get old, right? Not being in the 30s anymore, it's a different experience than when you're 20 and in your teens, where the body is starting to really feel a lot of different things. What to speak of when we get into our 50s, then our 60s, 70s, so on, where the body is just really experiencing old age. So to know this, and Srila Prabhupada says that unless we have a pessimistic view of this material life, considering the distresses of birth, death, old age, and disease, there's no impetus for making advancement in spiritual life. And I would have to further reflect that this is definitely in the very beginning of Krishna consciousness. This is the Vaidhi sadhana platform, where we have a pessimistic view of this material life, and we're considering that this is an impetus for our spiritual life. Later on, when you actually get a taste, you're motivated more by the taste and the experience of Krishna consciousness, but still these are a proper form to make, to give impetus for our making advancement in spiritual life. If we have this aspect of us, or we have a pessimistic view, and we're considering these distresses, then it's going to help us in our spiritual life, because we're going to understand that there's different distresses. First of all, how do we get free of the distress? But then also that aspect of death. What are we doing with our life in terms of spiritual life? Everything around us is full of distress, but we have an opportunity to really perfect our life. And so impetus for making advancement in spiritual life, especially when you're sick, you think, man, what to speak of what death is going to be. Even when you're sick, you really feel it and you want to get better. So, and then this is the end of our topics of knowledge. And sorry if it went a little late, but we can now take any questions or reflections that anyone might have on any of these topics of knowledge or what we discussed today.
Prabhu?
Yeah.
Krishna Calvin?
The last statement that you put up about having a pessimistic view of life, I thought that encapsulated a lot. That was very succinct. And I was wondering if that was your own wording, and if it was, congratulations, I think you nailed it. Or is that from some literature?
Yeah, this is actually a direct statement of Srila Prabhupada in the purport. So if I'm not sure what page it might be on in other Bhagavad-gitas, but this is the last statement that Srila Prabhupada makes on page 576 of this Bhagavad-gita as it is, but it's in the starts with after the paragraph of false ego. He says one should try to understand the distress of accepting birth, death, old age, and disease. And then the last sentence of that paragraph, Srila Prabhupada says, unless we have a pessimistic view of this material life, considering the distresses of birth, death, old age, and disease, there's no impetus for making advancement in spiritual life.
Okay, thank you. I found it. I'm reading the purport. So yes, indeed.
All right. Thank you, Calvin. Tushta Krishna Prabhu, would you like to, I think you were about to speak, or if anybody else.
Yeah, I was just appreciating the how you were unpacking those verses from the Madhurya Kandambini, and how Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, as you know, we know him as a Rasacharya. He comments quite a bit extensively on 10th canto, and you know, there's a lot of flavor, sweetness, and how he's sharing with us kind of Krishna's mind and his emotions, and has a very intimate connection with being able to decipher Krishna's feelings. Anyhow, with all that, and then side by side, he gives such a systematic, very scientific, a very systematic process of what to watch out for in the Anartha-nivritti stage. And as you mentioned, all these different points about Utsaha Mayi, and very, very incredibly practical and systematic signposts of what to watch out for. So therefore, it's what I get from that is, and then also these symptoms of knowledge, is spiritual life isn't just a sentimental kind of, I'm just going to jump into it and levitate and see some lights and do some deep breathing and I'm spiritual. Much these acharyas are really showing us, and Krishna himself is showing us in these verses, what is the reality of knowledge? What is the reality of the process of self-realization? So I really liked how Yuan really thoroughly unpacked these points and did the PowerPoint. Yeah, so thank you for that. And always a refreshing reminder hearing those kind of signposts from the Madhura Kandamini.
Yeah, it's really, like you said, it's really deep what they go into and give us nice signposts. And grateful to actually, have that, to see where we are properly in our spiritual life. So to have those signposts we can go through, it's a nice sadhana to actually understand where we're at, what we're dealing with, what we're struggling with. And it's kind of amazing to think about how acharyas that have come before us, they're pointing these out for us, and some of them have even struggled with this aspect of, anartha-nivritti and, trying to stay steady and to just be steady in anything in life. It's quite difficult, right? Even in material life, when we think about people being steady, people being, just showing up day after day to do what they need to do. And then the same thing is there with spiritual life, that's actually an amazing barometer of somebody's spiritual life, that it's not just a whim, like you said, or, try to show up and levitate, but it's day in and day out practice, right? Which hearing from you, you connect that with martial arts or any other thing that we want to do. You have to show up and you have to have a regular practice. And by having that regular practice, becoming steady, then you actually get real traction rather than just kind of winging it in certain ways. So thanks for that reflection, Prabhu. So it's 4 minutes after. We can stop here, and thank you so much for your kind attention. And Vanchakalpa Trubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Bhagavad-gita as it is. Ki Jai Srila Prabhupada. Ki Jai.
See you in a few days. See you in a few days, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Looking
Krishna.
forward.
Jai. Hare Krishna. Take care, Jane.
Thank you
Take
so
care,
much.
Calvin. Take care, Calvin. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna to everyone.